Batu, Barada, Nikto. You must remember those words.
Gordon's alive.
You know what the Turing test is?
I know Kung Fu.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stories Out of Time and Space Patreon bonus. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly, and as always, I'm joined by Julian Darius. Julian, you okay?
I'm doing all right. As good as can be expected after watching this movie.
Yeah. Yes, we've done a bit of a double bill of post-apocalyptic or realistic post-apocalyptic misery, and we did The Day After on the main feed, and now we're going to talk about the British equivalent, Threads, from a year after in 1984. Yeah, we'll talk about this quickly. But basically, what happened was Barry Hines, who wrote this, watched or saw what Nicholas Meyer was doing, and said, "Huh, that level of misery, I can beat that." And so wrote Threads. Yes, this follows a very similar beat to The Day After, but set in Sheffield in the UK, in which we follow a series of what they refer to as sort of kitchen sink or sort of dining table sort of dramas, kitchen table dramas where people are discussing their lives and their sort of worries and their concerns, their jobs, usual bits and pieces. And in the background is the rising tension of nuclear war. And then basically around the same time, by the hour mark, the bomb drops on Sheffield. And we have quite a long period of devastation and burning corpses in the street. And then we get the following period, which is what happens after. And it's being sort of relayed in two different ways, as in there are different threads, including one of those things we didn't have in The Day After, but we do in this, is local government trying to deal with the situation whilst being trapped in an underground bunker. And having to deal with sort of food shortages, lack of control in energy and power, and also within sort of like law enforcement, so on and so forth. And each time it will skip forward as well, and we get sort of a general story as we follow. Ruth is our main sort of ends up becoming the main sort of protagonist as we head into the sort of later part of the story. And throughout this, I was going to say one of the weirdest parts, I didn't know this was coming in this. He's not credited, but you do get sort of like little bits of narration, including sort of it says sort of like what Sheffield is, where it is, so on and so forth, all coming from Nigel Hawthorne, who I also know as Humphrey Appleby from Yes Minister. And people may know as Dr. Cocteau from Demolition Man, but to have Nigel Hawthorne sort of narrating this thing throughout was incredibly bizarre. So, yeah. But Julian, over to you. What were your first initial thoughts then on Threads?
Well, I mean, I think this is, essentially a localization of The Day After. I found it harder to follow. I find
the
the
accents
narration
probably didn't help.
No, I mean right away it's like the first lines I'm like, okay, I gotta turn on subtitles for this.
Yeah.
I don't understand. You just talk about dating or something, and I don't understand a word. Yeah, so you're right. And then yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard to follow at times. I mean, it sort of jumps around. It has some of the problems of A Day After, where they'll like sort of cut a scene too early or too late.
Yes,
it's still true here, and I don't know why they imitated that. The narration is interesting, but then the narration like jumps around and sort of like will give basic information halfway through, and I don't know. I mean, the narrator is sort of schizophrenic and kind of all over the place. But I can imagine seeing this on British television at the time and being quite shocked. It doesn't pull its punches, which I quite like, and I love. We'll get to it how it telescopes into the future, which
Mm.
the day after doesn't do.
Yeah, no, I that bit I didn't expect that it sort of. I think it has like 10 years later or 15 years later or something like that.
Yeah,
And
it's like 14 or 13, 14 or something.
yeah, and does not have a hopeful. Not only is it like, well, nuclear war is inevitable, but after this, it'll be awful for a year. Oh, it won't get any better. It's sort of, it really does. It's quite. I mean, this is to me. I joked about it before, but this is really like Barry Hines was like, you know, Nicholas Meyer made this thing, and like, hold my beer. Let's see how
Mhm.
bleak and miserable I can go with this. What I really like about this in particular, and you're right about it being localized. It's based in Sheffield. The accents are very northern in that respect. It's not even that northern, but they're much more sort of northern. It's set in the 80s as well, so there is that sort of like, age slang and sort of dialect as well to sort of pass out. But as you said, it is what it is. Like it's normal life. There are guys talking about there's a much like in the day after, there's a young couple that have been dating and you or sort of, been courting, and we find out that the girl is pregnant. There's other groups that you find out about, like, there's a family with a young son, and then there's, then you start to see this sort of local council group, and much like with the day after, they sort of start to introduce you to the groups that you're going to be dealing with later on, or at least you're going to give enough information about them to see where they are when the bomb drops, and then throughout it, you get again, much like, I mean, the first hour is very similar. Like I almost thought like these could be in the same universe because it's almost like the same triggering event as well. They both talk about two nuclear bombs going off somewhere in
Mm.
Eastern Europe, and in both films. So I kind of think these are the same universe, just sort of like different parts of the
Different
world.
corners, yeah.
Yeah. Um, and then when the bombs go off, you sort of get to follow some of these groups. Um, And so, yeah, the whole first part, I know what you're saying. I can understand sort of, coming from an American point of view, watching this and being like, it's almost because it's so old, not so old, I mean, it's 1984, but there's such a distance in time that this could almost be seen as a parody. Do you know what I mean? Because it's so authentically 1984, sort of like Sheffield, that you could almost see, like, I feel like there are scenes in this that I could almost see like Monty Python doing. Do you know what I mean? That sort of like, there's the sketch of like, you think you were poor, we lived in a cardboard box in the middle of the road, and ate grit,
Mm.
that kind of thing. There's a little bit of that about it. And so watching it, I was like, oh, this hasn't aged well in that respect. But it was contemporary for the time. Um,
One of the oldest things for me is the on-screen titles, which
yeah.
like make the original games look sophisticated. Where it's just like that sort of like computer font. The titles don't hold on screen long
Yeah,
enough
the, the,
to
the
actually
clittering away
read
like a
them.
type, the clittering away for like as a typewriter, yeah, to come up like
Yeah.
we can't afford to make them look good, so we're going to pretend it's a typewriter face. Yeah, I agree. It does look a little bit. I mean, the budget in this um is very low. Like
Yeah.
this was very much made for. One of the things, just as a side note, originally when this was first pitched, it was going to be made by Granada. It's a company called Granada Television, which also make a soap opera that's been going since the early 60s called Coronation Street, which is set in
Mm.
Manchester. And so one of the pitches for this originally was let's save money because we've already got them contracted. Let's use the cast of Coronation Street as the cast of Threads. And it was shot down very quickly because the feedback was nobody wants to see, and people might know this name, Deirdre Barlow being blown up by a nuclear bomb. So that was shut down. But the thought that that was even a possibility is kind of nice. I love that as being that's very British. Like we've got these people anyway. Let's use those. Um,
It's quite reasonable.
it is. Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
see contract players. Why not? Um, but how did you the first hour? Let's just sort of talk about this first bit then, because again, one of the things I'll throw this in and see what your thoughts are. Because one of the things we talked about with the day after was again there is clarity. I think the groups are very well defined and you also got some actors like Steve Guttenberg, John Lithgow. You've got these guys that you sort of merit, of legacy. We know that they go on to do stuff, and so I felt it was relatively quite clear cut because these are all sort of clearly not low grade sounds awful, but like these are no one in this went on to become a star. Let me put it that way.
Hmm.
Um, I feel that again, I can follow it, but again, I feel that my UK knowledge and being a kid during this period helps. So, were you able to follow any of the groups that were being established in that first hour?
I think so. I mean, I think by and large. But for me as an American, like, I'd imagine it's like if you grew up in Delhi and you're watching the day after, and like you're as interested in like life in Kansas as you
Yeah.
are in the details of the pending apocalypse. That's sort of what it's like for me. I mean, it's like the dynamics of like, is it a scandal that you've, impregnated your girlfriend, or this kind of like lower class, working class sort of family, and that kind of
Oh
thing.
yeah.
I mean, that's as interesting to me as the ratcheting up of stuff's happening in Iran, which
No,
doesn't
no,
I don't feel the tension as much.
no. I think that, for example, is a really good identifier because one of the things that doesn't exist in the day after that I think does in this, or is again I think more of a British thing, is class. This is a class thing. This is very
Americans don't
much
believe in class.
yeah.
Which
And
has good and bad sides, right?
yeah, but what I'm saying, like, this is very much a working class
Mm.
set of people, and I think that what that comes with is when you have that, if you don't have the money to give your status, you give your status through other elements, and a lot of that is through, you know, and I say honor, but like playing by the rules, doing the right thing, being seen as the sort of like the better thing, and so yeah, like even in the early '80s, I would say well into the '80s, um, pregnancy out of wedlock would have been a bit of a devastation because gossip. Do you know what I mean? You would become the point of gossip then for that street or that sort of community where, like, oh, bloody hell, Margaret's young one, she's become pregnant, eh? Bloody slut. Like that, it would be all that kind of thing. So it would be devastating for a family, for the
I
father to go
remember
to
that
work and
stuff.
stuff.
I
Yeah.
mean, that was true, the small town where I went to
Mm,
high school. It was largely true of the older generation, but they would talk about, the so and so's kids, well, when you get pregnant, without being married, what do you expect, kind of thing.
mm. That
Yeah.
exactly that, and
Yeah.
it is kind of a big deal. Um, so that there are those things, and I think it's really trying to highlight um, this is an industrial city. I mean, this is Sheffield pre the collapse of the steel industry. That bless her, Maggie Thatcher would make an absolute um, mess of later in the '80s. So the steel industry was still sort of going relatively strong in the early '80s. There'd been hassles, but it's still there. Um, so there was still a pride in being sort of like from Sheffield and that sort of thing. What I find interesting is when it shows you like the town centre, like it shows you that sort of
Hmm.
city centre, and that's some of that. What's hilarious is I went online and there's a documentary being made about this at the moment. There's a Kickstarter making a documentary about Threads because obviously it's been
Hmm.
30 years this year, and there are photos on there of that city centre taken in 2024, and some of it is very much still the same. And that's kind of interesting. Where like there's people, gone almost like shot for shot, like oh, they stood here. This is what that high street looks like. This is what this town shot looks like. And I thought that was really interesting. That like there are parts of Sheffield that just haven't changed barely at all. There's some new trees, additional bins, that kind of thing. But
Yeah.
generally, like
The recycling bins, and
yeah,
the street has an EV charger, but
but
well, that probably
generally,
says a lot about the collapse of the steel industry, right?
mm,
I mean, you know.
yeah. So it focuses on those things. You have the pub culture, you have the working class culture of sort of like there's banter and sort of, taking the mickey and all these other connections and that sort of thing. Um, but the thing that I've, as it goes through that's more interesting is this element of class is you also get a local councillor who, so you've got the working class people, and then you have this local councillor and his wife is asking him questions about, like, they know more information, and she's going, well, when it happens, will I be taken to the shelter? And what about this? What about government? And they talk about central government being taken to a series of
Mhm.
shelters and all this other stuff. So it does give you that contrast to kind of show you that there is a difference between, even at a local level, there is the councillor and the hoi polloi, the working class.
Well, when I think of like I was planning the joke like the original title for this is a very British apocalypse.
Yes.
Which I sort of suspect is like, you know, not to be a bother, kind sir, but my family's had no food for a good many weeks now.
Yeah.
I terribly don't mean to be out of place. Just kind of like, uh, which is the sort of downside of class and the idea of
Mm,
one's betters, right? But the upside is also visible of like um and I don't know that really in practice how much these things influence anything, right? I mean, because you see like a British mob later on, and
mm,
I mean, but I sometimes wonder, like, in practice, do these things influence anything? But I mean, the upside of that sort of system is Britain's always seemed to me sort of like it runs and operates in a much more orderly, competent bureaucratic fashion than the United States.
mm.
Um, I mean, to me, the most British thing I have ever experienced is getting off of the metro and seeing a placard on the street that says, "Attention! There has been a rash of cell phone thefts in this area. Please watch your." I think no one in America would ever put up this sign, right, to warn a tourist. It's like, no, watch yourself or get killed, and
Mm.
but we're certainly not going to single those people out as being a dangerous neighborhood. I mean, we know it is, but it would never occur to us to do that. But I mean, that does seem very just like, oh yeah, a competent government should do that, right? Like that's very, well, it just seems very systematic and reasonable in a way that we're not.
Mm.
Nobody ever accused America of being reasonable. So there is, especially in the preparation, I see that sort of governmental side as sort of like, oh, like you don't see any of that in
Mm.
any American movie, and any American movie, it's like the government is preparing for what to do. You see so much preparation in this, and I'm like, well, all that stuff would happen in the United States, but it would never occur to us to
Present it.
dramatize it,
Yeah.
because it's like, well, that's what the government should do, and if it doesn't, we'll be angry. But we would never highlight that. I don't know. That just seems quite a difference to me.
I think one of the reasons I agree with what you're saying, this idea, especially because we've been local government as well. Like we never see Westminster, we never see number 10. Like this is again, we never see high government. This is local government dealing with local problems. And one of the things is getting that preparation. They sort of know that something's coming, or they know that the tensions are there, it's building up, and they are talking about food stores, um, making sure they've got sufficient law enforcement preparations. Um, but one of the things I like that they're talking about is there's clearly like tension between them and other councils because they're bad mouthing other local councils. Well, that's their bloody problem. They haven't got enough stock for that's not our problem. We got after our people. So there is this sort of like bureaucracy and backbiting that goes on even before the bombs drop, which I think is accurate. I just think it's
Oh yeah.
it would exactly be that where like like two counties over, they're like, well, they've got that and we we need that, or we haven't got that, or whatever, and that does continue. Um, but so I do kind of like that it's like local and petty and bureaucratic, rather than it's not. This is the thing you say about not being presented. Like it's not present. It's again much like the day after. Well, I'd say the day after presents a kind of a heroic in the sense of like Steve Guttenberg's character sort of becomes this kind of tragic character that's helping the family, and the doctor, the main protagonist, that's the doctor, is sort of like stands by and works in the hospital and that kind of thing. There is none of that in this film. Like, no one is
Mhm.
heroic. It's
Mhm.
very bleak. The local government, when it collapses, there's no one going like, we have to fight on. Everyone starts arguing and, like, backbiting and name calling and all this kind of stuff. And it's a very different approach to telling the story. Um,
Well, I mean, what occurred to me is like, the American version of that would be like, the Clint Eastwood character who says, like, I'm the sheriff of this town,
yeah,
and, well, we've not been adequately prepared, but let me tell you, I mean, it's Rick Grimes, right? I mean,
Mm,
this is the American heroic type, right? I mean, and we have such a schizophrenic attitude toward government here, right? Like we imagine it's invisible and does nothing. But the moment it doesn't do its job, we're angry. Like we think government doesn't exist. We, don't see it, don't think about it. There's no, bureaucracy. But if it fails, like, Katrina happens, then it's like, well, why weren't you prepared?
yeah,
You've never made a single movie about it,
yeah,
preparations, right? Like you would never even think of it. Um, yeah, but you're right. I mean, that's very interesting that like the British version doesn't have the Threads doesn't have the any heroic figure. You're quite right. I thought the most British thing were these announcements,
mm, very proper.
beforehand. Oh yes, it's just like, while it's not guaranteed that we will face an atomic war, it is wise to be prepared.
Yeah.
Here's how to deal with bodies. And again, I sort of feel like this is that placard. This is
Mm.
like you would never get that advice in America because it would be like, that will worry people. Like, yeah, they'll figure out what to do where they won't. Fuck them,
Yeah.
right? Like, the British version is like, right. If you have a family member who dies, wait 5 days. If authorities still haven't shown up, here's how to properly bury them. It's like, oh, that seems very sophisticated and
Yeah.
reasonable to me.
Yeah. And we see it sort of play out. The other thing just to highlight on that is the announcements that get made like that, and also the things that highlight the tensions during between America and Russia. Um, they brought in newscasters. They actually are known British newscasters, which gives it again an authenticity because the voices that are coming through on the radio and on the television are voices that you will then hear telling you the news, telling you the regular news. So again, it has that sort of like bite of authenticity in that first bit, which is again, you're like, oh my God, this feels almost like the War of the Worlds esque in that they've brought in that element of sort of the everyday. And for them
Yeah,
to be
they missed an
saying these things,
opportunity to have Scott Brokaw in,
yeah.
and the day after.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the thing, isn't it? Again, because of the size of, because it's Kansas, you could have local ones, but these are like national broadcasters. Um, but yeah, the thing again, you see, before we get to the bomb dropping, is there's an element of they show that there's three different reactions, much like in the day after. There's the bureaucracy, which is all the preparedness, and before the bomb drops, they get into the shelter, and they've even had the call that said like shit's going down, get yourself sorted. You then get there are several families that are preparing by following the announcements. You see one family sort of taking all the doors off and putting up mattresses against it, so the wall, which is possibly the most pointless. We see that it's the most pointless thing, but they're doing this sort of shelter in inverted commas, and then you get those that aren't really taking it much seriously. Literally sort of like working class lads down the pub and all bantering at work and all this other thing. Like, yeah, it never bloody happened. Who's going to do that? And so you see the consequence for all three, which again I like that it sort of follows through. And so when the bomb drops, I think one of the things that's different is I think the day after is much more successful at ramping up the tension in a sort of more tangible um, way. In that you sense that I think you both said that you feel like there's a ticking clock. You feel like that countdown to midnight is tangible in The Day After. And especially that moment in when you see the bombs being launched or the missiles being launched, and John Lithgow's like character is like, "Oh no, we're screwed." Like, because
We have 30 minutes.
we have
Yeah.
30 minutes. Like, this is it. Like, we are done for. You don't really get that sense in Threads. It's much more of a shock. Like, they all of a sudden just like the 4 minute warning. Oh, and that's what I should highlight. You don't. I don't think this is a British thing. There's this thing called the 4 minute warning, which is the way it would work, and especially in the 80s, I think this is what it was agreed. They would use decommissioned air raid or blitz sirens, the big sort of things you push around and stuff, like a cat being squeezed. But also, they would send out any vehicle with a siren, if available. So you'd have police cars, ambulances, fire brigades, all going out to blare things. This would also potentially include, and this I saw this written down, so I'm not entirely sure if it's 100% true, but this potentially would include ice cream vans. So that would be hilarious. You'd have like, Nino, Nino, and then Greensleeves
Uh,
playing next to it
yeah.
in a really tinkly way.
That little ice cream jingle,
Yeah, that's
all the
it.
kids rush out into the
Rushing the
street
wrong way.
instantly,
Whee!
like,
Yeah. Um, but when the bomb does drop, and I want to talk about this because this was the first moment that took my breath away a little bit in this film, where like for the first hour I'm like, yeah, it's fine, doing its thing. Like I'm following it and it's all fine. The 4 minute warning goes, the first bomb drops, and it's an electromagnetic pulse. Cars stop,
hmm.
everything stops, and then and you see the effects of that, and then a bomb is dropped on Sheffield, and it's just sort of like windows are smashed through. That family that were putting the doors against the wall with the mattresses dive behind the doors, but they're not fast enough to get their son. They're hoping he'd be all right, and you just see the devastation. Like, this is where all the money, this is where the budget went. Like, they
Hmm.
blow the crap out of everything. And one of the things that we said about The Day After, and this is where it took my breath away. One of the things we said about The Day After is it was almost like watching a Doctor Who episode, which is what I was almost expecting with this. Is you have the and you see a skeleton sort of irradiates in the shape of the person, and then they're gone, and then you see
Hmm.
fire and you see buildings blow up. This one's like, yeah, right. Bring me the corpses, and we're going to just set them on fire, and you're going to see burning children, and you're going to see like tarnished corpses sticking out of rubble, and you're going to see things on, you're going to see people running in the street burning. Like, they went all out to show you some of the imagery during the explosions and the immediate aftermath. Yeah, I was not expecting how graphic and it really was. It kind of took me by surprise.
It's interesting to me. They sort of skimp on the explosions themselves, right?
Yes.
So, like, the American version has a car stopping on a highway,
Mm,
and you see the highway and you see an explosion in the
mm,
distance, and you've seen the nuclear missiles. So I have a better idea of sort of like what the environment looks like, where the bombs went off relative
mm.
to everyone else. Here, they just kind of like look to the sky and you cut to a mushroom cloud, and it's
Yeah.
like, imagine that's in the same picture, you know? So I think I have a much poorer idea of the attack itself.
Mhm.
But as you say, then it cuts to sort of like the immediate aftermath, and that's where clearly they felt they could achieve these effects, with the budget. And you're right, that stuff is very effective. I mean, I think, and throughout they sort of avoid the expensive makeup,
Mhm.
like what the day after does so well with
Oh
like the
yeah.
radiation and everything. Here it's like bloody bandages, people on fire, charred bodies, and all that stuff is done really well, but it's like an entirely different set of aesthetics.
Yes. No, I think that's interesting that you said. So the aesthetics is definitely um yeah, what they're going for. And one of the things that's kind of it thought of to me, because we talked about the difference being between The Day After is a rural community. It's all about farming, it's about the fields. The bombs are dropped on Kansas City, so there's some sort of distance away. So the point of The Day After is very much distance is irrelevant. You're still going to get sick. which means you're still going to die. With this, it's sort of like it's within that urban environment. So there's a lot of like glass being blown out, houses being bombed down. Now I know this is 84, and so but there are still well there are people alive that will have watched this that will have experienced the Blitz 40 years before. So there is still that very sort of like tangible national memory watching this of a sort of a Sheffield got bombed just like any other of the major industrial cities. There is still that sort of like tangible sense of yeah, this feels real. Like we've seen this happen. Like this is almost within living memory at that point of this city burning, not to this extent, but in this way, in a
Mhm.
similar way. And so I think that there is this sort of like ground level of like we don't know where the bombs came from because we didn't know during the bloody Blitz. We just saw
Mm.
the devastation. Like, bombs went off, people got covered in debris or lost limbs or were blown apart, and that's kind of what it is. And so to me, it felt like the confusion of that, like this is like the Blitz. This is a real amping up of that devastation, but that implicit sort of confusion and trusting in the government, that sort of like putting masking tape in a cross across your window to prevent, or to reduce glass shattering and that sort of thing, which you see in this film. They do those things, and well, if what the government says it's okay to hide behind three wooden doors and a couple of mattresses, then it must be all right. Um, so that was my sense. And I think that might be like again like a maybe like a national thing where you sort of watch it and you go, oh, I have that sense of connection to from a historical perspective. So but I know exactly what you're saying. Um,
Well, that's
you,
a really good point about the Blitz, right? And
mm,
and you know, the moment that was most apparent to me is in those government announcements where they're talking about in the event of an air attack,
mm,
and you're talking about like air raid sirens and stuff like that. The only time in American history that we ever used that kind of language was really in the 50s.
mm.
When we were talking about like the bomber gap and the idea of this being really nukes being delivered by plane before ICBMs. And then it disappeared. And I mean, it is true that in our two national characters, I mean, the lack of an attack on American soil outside of 9/11 and January 6th and isolated things like that is a defining trait
Mm.
versus the Blitz being inscribed really in the national trauma of Britain. And I do see that in this film, that there is a lot of that trauma kind of gets applied forward to how this would play out.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean that's clearly in that sense, and I think there's almost a romanticization of a romanticizing of what the Blitz spirit was. This thing of like well we all went down to the bomb shelters or down to the tube stations and we all sang songs whilst while the Jerrys bombed us. All this idea of like switch that light out. All this there's this sort of community sense that was this that we call even sort of the Blitz spirit. Like we still refer to it today. It's a bit of a con. Like,
Hmm.
we also know that when people were down there were also a lot of other people breaking into houses and stealing other people's things. There was, all kinds of stuff going on, whilst it was black. I mean, let's be clear, you know, there were sexual predators about in the 40s just as much as there are today that fully took advantage of the blackouts. Like, there's this romanticization. It's all a bit of a nonsense. But we
Well, and
do
that's
that
what I
kind of
mean
thing.
by like I don't know that any of these things are really different in practice,
Hmm.
but I mean, there is a kind of like collectivism
Mm.
in Britain that we do not have,
Yeah.
Um, you know, there a lot of it comes down to that. But,
Mm.
I, I quite think we go too far in that direction. So, I mean, I like it's like you guys rely on government. So it's like, well, there's nothing to do but what the government has said. It could be bollocks, but
Yeah.
what else are you gonna do? As Americans are like, you know, I think this I've decided this mattress will protect me. I'll do that. Nobody listens to the government.
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
practice, I don't know that it's that different, but the
Y-
mode is so different.
Yes. Yeah. The destination is the same,
Yeah, right.
but the journey to get there is slightly different. Um, yeah, but I think what we end up with though is in the immediate aftermath, you see the devastation, and you do see like images of humans and animals, everything sort of like being burnt in the. You see burning corpses, teeth and bone on display, limbs being sort of pushing out of rubble. There's some really sort of quite. There's an image of a pram that's been crushed, and there's other things like this. There's nothing. Well, we'll get to an image of a baby that shortly,
Mm.
but it's kind of
Charred
shocking.
corpses.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
all over the place. And again, in linking back to those sort of the gritty carnage of what would have been the true Blitz devastation. Um, and so, but we then get the different groups. And it basically comes down to three groups. You then sort of narrow it down to two these very three specific groups. There is the bunkered in local council bureaucracy trying to deal with things. There is a couple hidden behind some doors and mattresses whose son has been lost, and we'll touch on those in a minute. And the third group is a sort of this family with a girl who has been pregnant, and it's a mother and father, their daughter, and I think it's the grandmother, which is the mother of the father, who's been living
Mhm.
with them. And so you sort of follow them in these three different. They're hiding in a basement, so they've had this sort of cover, um, and you sort of see these different groups looking to survive. And what I like about this is it's sort of you say about the typeface. One of the things that we sort of noted with the day after, it's called the day after. It clearly follows a much longer timescale, but you didn't have a sort of a definition of what that timescale was. It didn't sort of say how long it was. This does. I think that's one of the things I like about this. It sort of says day one, day two, and then it will jump to like day 10 and this other stuff. So it progresses to
Right.
say, right, things are getting worse or better. Um, and you see people getting worse from like radiation sickness and those kinds of things. And again, one of the things you see the immediate is the family in the bunker or the family in the basement. They're doing okay, but they've got rations, and they're slowly getting sicker. The couple behind the door, what the woman got burnt, and you see them staying there. You've said you've joked about it, but there's almost like the idiocy of staying behind these wooden doors and mattresses because that's all there is to do, and they stay there for days. And the woman is clearly very, very ill. Like, she's being sick,
Mm.
he's coughing up blood, and so she's half burnt. They can't find their son. I mean, there's a moment when she's just sort of like, she actually says, like, I wish I was dead. Why didn't the bomb take me? Like, and there's this realization of like, yeah, the surviving is not the thing to do. And then the bureaucracy sort of just struggling. Initially, sort of, it's all phone calls, and they because they're bunkered in, someone gets hit on the head and they die, so they've got to sort of wrap up a dead body because they can't get it out. And there's an element of confusion, but sort of it starts almost with a sort of another thing, the Dunkirk spirit. We're going to be strong and we're going to stand and we're going to do the right thing. And it kind of starts, and you see that deteriorate as people become more desperate. But yeah, that immediate aftermath. What did you of these three groups? How did you find that sort of those narratives?
Well, I love what you're saying about sort of like the Dunkirk spirit and the Blitz spirit, and how watching that evaporate,
Mm,
must be part of the special national tragedy that's
yeah.
being depicted here. Um, I mean, in terms of the scenes that you're talking about, one of the most affecting for me was the mother getting sick.
Mm,
Um, and she has this great dialogue. And again, I think I would totally expect somebody of that generation saying the exact same thing in America, but it's so inflected, right? And she says, "I'm so ashamed."
oh, the grandmother.
And
Yes. Oh,
yes, and
I know
she's
exactly.
vomited or
She
shit
soiled the
herself
bed.
or
She says
yeah,
I'm so ashamed I've soiled the bed again. And yeah.
yeah. Oh, and she says like I felt it welling up, and I forget exactly, but it's so minimal, and it's so British in its
Mm.
avoidance of what's really going on, right? And semi-Japanese in its like indirectness.
Mm.
Whereas America would say like, I've shit myself again.
Yeah.
Like,
Get a
uh,
sponge.
yeah, yeah. But and again, I think especially I would imagine like my mother would react the same way. I mean, and has.
Mm.
But uh yeah, that struck me. Like
Mm.
I love the interiority of that, of like
Mm.
the shame, the sense of like, and you think that's madness, right? Like, I
Yeah.
mean, we're all dying, we're all going through hell, and you're worried about the embarrassment of who. That's the least of our worries right
Yeah.
now. Like it's not fun, but we're all gonna starve. We're all gonna die of radiation.
Yeah.
So that
Well,
struck me.
and because it keeps doing these little things. I mean, you follow these songs, you return, and between these two groups, you return to them, and like, they're trying to make sort of people eat, and the girl that's pregnant, they're trying to make sure she has enough food, and it's sort of they're eating beans or peas and different bits and pieces. Um,
And she's despondent.
oh,
I mean,
she's
she's
yeah.
much like the daughter in the day after, who goes up and
Mm,
sees the dead cows and stuff, right? She's the love interest who's like, there's no point anymore.
yeah. Um, yeah, because I want to get to her because that's Ruth. She becomes almost like the
Yeah,
main character for sort of the third part of the film. But when we go back to this couple that's been behind these doors, they finally decide, I think it's day 10 it gets to, and they decide that they've got to leave because they've run out of water, they're dying of thirst, and so they start to creep out, and he goes out to look for water, and it's obviously rained, and there's water sort of trickling down this thing, and he sort of tries to catch it in a jug, and he starts to um, drink the water, and then looks up and sees there's basically a bloody charred hand sticking out, and the water's trickling off it, and he just spits it out. And the part of going like, I wouldn't worry about that so much because the water's all irradiated anyway. But um,
right,
he then looks round and you see the wife come out and they start looking for the son because they see the house has collapsed and they'd hoped he'd got to something. And all you see is this pair of sort of like trainers and his jeans sort of sticking out of the rubble. And that's it.
right.
Like their son didn't make it. Like he was gone, and you kind of realize that like, he's kind of like the lucky one in the situation. But it's quite an impactful scene again where they look out on the street, and it's just devastation. Like everything's gone. Um, and you see the corpses again, and it's like again animals and people. It's really then this does not you said doesn't pull its punches. Um, and you're kind of wondering where this couple's going to go, and they don't go. They literally die behind that. They return to the shelter. They go back to behind the door, think it's the only thing they can do, and then just die. Um, which is to give up.
Happy. Um,
Mm,
yeah, I thought I mean, like the American version, they don't see the death of their son, right?
mm,
Who's perished in the blast. You know, yeah, seeing the corpse and seeing the is sort of affecting. It's a different choice. But I'm with you about like that comes after this discussion of Fallout,
mm.
which is a little strange, right? The way it's presented is like it sucks up dust. No, that's not exactly right, but okay. Um, but at least it's trying to present to the audience, this concept. And yeah, I mean, there is a hopelessness there. I find the reaction of the local government in that bunker some of the most fascinating, effective stuff.
Mm.
As they decide, like, okay, well, do we release food? And this thing that's utterly absent from the American one of like, well, you get more food if you work. Like
Yes,
that's like, what does that say? Is that
based
uniquely
on
British,
calories.
or
No, well, possibly. I think it's just the way they do it because they give them a defined calorie count, don't they? They say, right,
500 versus 1,000?
yeah, for non-workers, 500. For workers, they get 1,000 calories. And even someone points out, like,
We
who
think a
can survive?
thousand. Yeah, we think 1,000 calories is a light breakfast over here.
Yes.
So
Yeah, but I like the fact that you say that they're discussing this and someone clearly points out, is that even enough to survive? And the response is, we don't really have a choice. Like that's how it breaks down. Yeah.
Well, one of the best voiceover bits is the discussion of the NEH. Oh, not the NEH, the National Health Service.
Oh, the
Um,
NHS. Oh, because I was
yeah,
going to mention that the hospital. Yeah.
but and you know, obviously we don't have a National Health Service, sadly. You know, it is a crowning gem of British achievement, which Brits rightly should be proud of. Um, but to hear like at its height, if it before the attack, it would have been unable to address solely Sheffield.
Mm,
Uh, and I think that that drives home the scale of the tragedy and the resources needed. And it's sort of like saying, you know, the National Guard, the entire National Guard for all 50 states would have been unable to address this
yeah.
event in New Orleans alone. You know, like, oh, okay, well, clearly we are just beyond the pale. And I think especially for people who are listening to radio broadcasts and following advice, right? That complete inability of government to simply be large enough to structurally handle something like this
Mm.
is quite shocking.
Yeah, I do. I agree because it's again they sort of cut these into scenes in this segment with regards to the hospital. There's two parts to this I thought were really good and sort of struck home to me. You're right about the comment that basically the whole National Health Service couldn't have sort of wasn't enough to facilitate the help that Sheffield needed. And you just see this sort of this. It's almost like something from The Walking Dead. All these bandaged and hurt people, sort of like forcing their way into this hospital, and these nurses and doctors, and trying to cope with this stuff. And again, whilst the day after focused on a hospital and sort of had some order to it to show that they were like, okay, well, the morgue is falling, so we've got to do this. This is only a segment, and it's just chaos. And I think you talk about the makeup. This is where they clearly wanted to use some of it because it is bloody and gory in parts. It pans across a bunch of people, and you do see sort of like burn makeup. There's a young boy with thing. But one of the things that they show, there's a guy in the background having his leg amputated. And you just see him being like held down. You just see two guys holding him down, where the guy's like, "Well, I've got a saw. Off you go." Like there's no anesthetic, anything. But one of the things that it shows you in very quick thing is someone with a pair of forceps, like a pair of tweezers or whatever, pulling glass out of someone's back.
Mhm.
And you sort of go, oh yeah, it's not just, that thing. Like it's going to be all the explosion injuries as well. Like, people have lost limbs and people have metal and debris and shrapnel sort of wounds and that sort of thing. So there'll be tears and breakages and all kinds of things. And it makes you realize, like, you think about the radiation because that's the primary, event. But then you think, oh yeah, no crap, there's all this other stuff, glass, wood, metal, rubble that will have hurt and injured and broken people. So yeah, it's kind of shocking.
You're right, and maybe this is the Blitz kind of being superimposed, but you
Mm,
know, I find that the I kept thinking like, well, where's the radiation poisoning? Where's the, you know, and it's there, but it's
mm,
very minor, you know, in comparison. I mean, that's much more the drama that, you know, the day after is
yeah,
remembered for. All of this sort of like conventional destruction and especially concern for food,
mm,
right? Which again is there in the day after, but it seems like they both have very different foci. You know, and here it's food, it's much more the, you know, conventional damage, conventional injuries, you know, and the radiation stuff, it's there, but it's kind of like in the background and not the primary thing being dramatized, whereas
yeah,
that is the primary thing in the day after. And they both do a great job at what they're doing,
mm,
right? You know,
it is slightly different tax approach to this different thing. Um, but we then get to, I
The
think,
the
no, go on.
food stuff. Sorry, the
Mm,
food stuff becomes very important as we continue, and I think that's done very well, right? Of just like, no, well, I mean, of course, they're farmers,
yeah.
and you do see them trying to till the soil here too. But no, I mean, they're farmers in the US version. Here, you imagine people in a city, just going, I mean, it made me think, I live in Waikiki. It made me think, oh, we're completely screwed, right? Like, we depend on imported food to survive on an island, right? Like,
Well, I think yeah, the food bit. I mean, to sort of to bring it to context, I think there's a scene. So as we jump forward, to go back to this, to round it out to the family in the basement. They've obviously got some tins and things down there. They've been eating sort of like rationing out a bunch of tins, but they have a they have well rationed. The dad's been kind of like preparing them a little bit. But the grandmother dies, and so the body is put out. But then also Ruth, the daughter, has a very similar moment to the daughter in the day after, and basically says, "I'm done with this, and I'm off." And she sort of runs out. And we'll get to her in a moment. But later we return, and we actually find that the mother and father are still in the basement, and two looters basically turn up, kill them, take the food, the tins, and then you think, oh my God, that's terrible. But it will happen. And then these looters step outside, and the army turn up and basically just kill them and beat them up. And then you think, well, they're just killing them for looting. And then there's this sort of offhand conversation between two of the soldiers, where one's like, "Oh, it's condensed milk. I like a bit of condensed milk."
hmm
It's so offhand and brutal, and sort of like that they've just killed these two or three guys for these tins of food, and you realise how desperate the situation's gotten. That basically like two old people have died, three looters, and at the end up with the soldiers. But there's still this sort of blasé discussion about what's in this tin of food. Um, yeah, it gets it's I don't know, it's quite horrific sort of times.
it's strange, and I don't know if this is like British understatement, but I feel like if that were done in America, and you did see, sort of like firing squads in the day after, but if that were done in America, it would be like like, look at what these cops have been reduced to, right? Like,
Mm,
this is the moment where you lose your soul, where you've basically executed people for looting and then looted yourself, right?
yeah,
um and here it's just so understated that it's like, oh, this is, of course, this is completely corrupt, but
but I think that's it. I think there's almost the British sensibility is that um I don't say the death by a thousand cuts kind of thing, but it's that sort of like the normalization of brutality. Like we're kind of like, maybe this is I think this comes from the birth no, no, not I don't want to use the first birth for nation, that's wrong, wrong terminology. But I think this comes from the national identity of the two nations, that America has very much is regardless of its current state, is always been about hope. It's about expansion, that sort of like manifest destiny and all this other stuff. Like it's about the American dream and blah 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 blah. Right?
can do spirit.
The can-do spirit, yeah. There's the power of the individual and all that. That's the American. So when you see corruption in that way, despite the fact that it's clearly rampant throughout anyway, there is a disgust at it of like um oh my God, I can't believe that. As you said, they would basically kill these and then loot them. It's just look at what you've become. This is what the officers of the law have become. Over here, I think because we have such a long history of subservience and class system, and these are the things that have basically just
Monarchy.
monarchy exactly that have gone on for like thousands of years, or at least over sort of like we're talking 1,500 years of sort of like controlled national monarchy and government, that we're kind of like, yeah, this is what happens. We had
hmm
lords that, persecuted and treat people like crap. We had fifedom, and then we had it's still gone on now. Like this is exactly what it is. So we're kind of like, yeah, this is of course this is what happened. Like we're kind of like almost numb to it from a historical context. That like when you see it, you're just sort of like, yeah, well, of course that's what happens. Um, and I think this is actually one of the you say about the food situation. I think this same scenario plays out a little bit later on, and is actually even more not so much shocking, but is almost underplayed because it's so quick, but is more impactful. Ruth goes through a whole bit of a quest. She goes on a bit of a side quest, but one of the things that they do later on is they're rehousing people. And so
Hmm.
they're
Oh
grouping people
yeah.
together and they'll take, well, these people have lost their houses and they're putting them into other people's houses. And there's this old guy who's fighting it. You can't put people in my bloody house. God, I don't know who they are. Argues it on the front door, and the police just say, it's the law. That's the way it's got to go. You're taking these people in. And again, we're talking about evacuees. This is, obviously kids that were sent off to the countryside. So this it's still mirroring this sort of World War II mentality. But what you see is he sort of reluctantly ends up taking them in because the police say so. And the moment the police are gone, he kicks them all out the back door,
Hmm.
including
Hmm.
Ruth, who at the time is pregnant. Um,
Hmm.
and so, there is no sympathy, there is no empathy. It is very much this thing of like, this is this is a man's home at his castle, and you are not invading it. And it comes down to this idea of the individual, and it should be a much bigger deal. Again, if this was done I believe if this was done on an American version of this scenario, this thing of being pushed in the front door and kicked out the back would be a much more drawn out scenario. There'd be a whole
Oh
debate
yeah.
about, the right of the person and
Hmm.
property and, helping each other either out. No, none of that. Don't care. Out you go. And it's kind of brutal in its simplicity of, well, this is of course what would happen.
Well, both of these are, that and the cops with the tins are so understated, right? I mean,
Mm,
they just are presented, and that's part of the strength of the presentation. Um, I mean, I think what you were saying about, I mean, the class difference is so strong, right? I mean, in practice, I don't know. Again, I don't know that there's any big difference, right,
mm,
between the two countries, but there is something, I mean, even though like the robber barons would do what they want, and like Americans have a fascistic siding with the people in power. Having said that, there's a sort of disgust,
mm,
innate disgust in this country at differentiation by class, at treating people differently, and at abuse of power. I mean, half the documentaries we produce are about, can you believe someone abused power this way? And the rest of the world goes, yeah,
yeah.
we're kind of used to, that's what we would expect. Um, and I think that, the same thing, like that old codger, you would have that character in America, right? And he'd be, I found myself thinking about, I mean, this is ridiculous because it's not in living memory, but how much of our property rights goes back to, the Revolutionary War and
Mm,
British demands at commandeering houses for, quartering
mm.
British soldiers. And what a national trauma that was, and how much that influenced, our property rights and our, illegal search and seizure, and all of this. I mean, it's in the Constitution as if this is going to happen any day, right? You can't quarter people. Um, so that is so innate to,
Mm.
the American. At the same time, there's a kind of collectivism of like, well, yeah, the government shouldn't do this, but if it were starving, dying people, right? Like you are a monster for doing this. And like you say, it's just presented as a fait accompli,
Yeah.
and here it's just, yeah, this is what people would do.
No, and I think this is these two elements are I would almost I don't know, but I could see them being a comment either on the shift away from that ideal of the Blitz spirit of support and taking in evacuees and all this other stuff. And again, there are stories of kids being treated horrendously in these evacuated things. There were kids that had a great time and stuff, but there were others that got treated awfully. Um, but this whole thing of, it's trying to sort of de-romanticize this idea of the collective spirit. And I do wonder if that's part of the 80s mentality of,
Mm.
Margaret Thatcher's famous quote of like, there is no such thing as community. It is all about the individual, sort of that
There's no
idea.
such thing as society.
Yeah,
I mean,
that was
whoa.
that. Yeah, no, dude,
I know.
that was Thatcher's position on things. And so I wonder, I do think if this is a satire or not so much, but a commentary on 80s stance on those things. Um, so yeah, it is making those things, and it will come up again as we sort of go towards the end. One thing I want to go back to Ruth and her leaving. This is almost like the final time it gets a chance to really hammer home the devastation. And again, it shows you things. She leaves the basement, she runs into the environment, she starts sort of like she calls out for her boyfriend, and no one responds. And then she starts to see people. And this is like the initial sort of again, relatively soon after the disaster. I think it's within 7 days, maybe 10. And you see bodies, and bodies. But even I'm sort of a bit sort of like, numb to the sort of the corpses that are hidden in, on show and limbs sticking out and all this other stuff. And I think like they know that. So like, all right, we're going to up the ante one little bit. And she comes across a woman nursing the burnt corpse of a baby.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
It just sat in the street. And I was and that really kind of like, I was like, oh my God. Like I was watching it on my laptop and I was just like, oh, that I was not expecting. But it's the way the woman doesn't, her
Say
eyes.
anything.
Yeah, she doesn't say anything. She just sits
Yeah.
there cradling this burnt corpse, but her eyes follow Ruth as she walks past. And it's harrowing. Like it was really bothering me. Like of all the images well, there's several, but that is one of the images that really stuck with me after watching this film. That was like, I need to go watch something a bit more lighthearted, like, like Saw or something, just to get over it.
Yeah. Yeah, you got to wash it down with a bit of Hostel.
Yeah.
Yeah, that scene stuck with me too. And the thing that stuck with me is like and we have these encounters on the street anyway.
Mm.
These like uncomfortable eye contact, right? I mean, it's like a homeless person, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or somebody who you don't know how to socially deal with. But neither really break eye contact. And Ruth stares for quite some time. And you don't know what this mother is going to do. I mean, and it's sort of like, are you staring because it's hard to take this in? I mean, this is terrible. Does she know the baby's dead? Clearly she does, but
Yeah.
I mean, it's that eye contact. And of course, again, I mean, I think we do the same thing here, but again, you would have how very British to focus on the social anxiety of the post-apocalypse, like
Yeah.
well, we can't eat, but I'm frightfully uncomfortable,
Yeah. Would you mind not looking in my direction? I'm sorry. You're putting me off my my tin of beans. Yeah. But then it becomes her journey, and that's what it sort of focuses on. I think the film sort of cuts into three, like, as the film goes on, what I liked about this film actually was we've talked about the degradation, the sort of like the disintegration of things, and society is obviously a big part, and we see how things fall apart. So the couple that lost their son, we see that they both die, and it comes back and you see their corpses sort of like hidden behind the door, done. The Ruth runs away, but you see then the fate of her family and how that's sort of part of it. And as we go through, you see the just sort of like the breakdown of this government group. By the way, we should highlight they're in a bunker, but they actually the council house collapses in on top of them, and they are actually stuck there and can't get out. So they're actually trapped as well, and they continue to do their work whilst trapped. But what I like about their bit is they like become slightly less like more and more disheveled until at the end, like one of them's just wearing a vest. The other guy's sort of like his shirt's all open and tattered, and the woman's hair's all a mess and sort of thing. And they're getting like really angry with each other. So one of them's like, oh, we've got to do this. And he's like, I'm trying to do my part of this. You deal with that. Like, I can't keep dealing with your incompetence. and they're
Hmm.
getting, and eventually you sort of see them. You basically they get dug out eventually, and you find they've all died.
Yeah.
Um, they all sort of starved and suffered from radiation poisoning as well.
Yeah, I really love that group, and I love those hard choices and looking and then seeing that group and saying, well, none of these are good choices, and we kind of suspect none of these decisions are going to matter anyway. But we're going to carry on doing this. I mean, and I do like the conflict with the um, city governments around them. Um, where it's sort of like the national government is gone, right?
Mm,
We have to do our best, but we're utterly aware, like our best is you know, completely pathetic.
yeah.
Um,
Well,
yeah, so I did like those decisions.
and I like what you're saying there about the planning is one thing, and then the implementation is pretty pathetic because there is a food riot. Like there's a place where the food is, and it gets attacked, and it all sort of comes apart, and that leads to concentration camps being set up or outdoor sort of and you think, oh, this is going to be enforced by the military, and they've literally tried to look for anybody with a uniform with any level of sort of perceived authority, and they've gone down to, and this is a very famous image because it was always on the cover, a
Mm.
traffic warden with a rifle who
Yeah.
has got like a bandaged face. And he's sort of just patrolling around this group of people that are trapped in this tennis court that's been used as a I don't know, like an open air cell, really, like a prison. Um, and so yeah, as you say, like it's pathetic in reality, like how they've sort of done it. But I love it focuses in on this traffic warden and that look on his face again of this mask covering the top half of his face. It's just
Mhm.
his eyes up, but he's sort of broken and sort of you can see them. I have no idea why I'm here. Like, what is the point of this? Um, there's no sort of like power play. There's not like, oh, I'm in charge now. This, because one of the things we should say, it's almost like a British joke. There's always a British joke. You've heard of the term job's worth. Oh, it's more of my job's worth.
Mhm.
The thing is, we would say in this country that a traffic warden is sort of like the epitome of the job's worth. Like they have a thimble worth of power because they can give you
Mm.
a seat, a ticket for doing whatever, and they will use that power to the sort of like the to the absolute hilt. They will try and be, and so the traffic warden in this country has always been a figure of mockery, and so to
Derision.
yeah, exactly. So to have them in this position now as sort of like a prison warden and being given a rifle is both a sort of like a poking of fun at the traffic
The
warden,
traffic wardens.
but also highlights how low they are having to
Mhm.
scrape to gain any level of authority or any sort of like authoritarian structure.
When the traffic warden is in charge of the concentration camp, you've got problems, right?
Yes,
I guess the American equivalent would be like the meter maid.
yes, yes.
Like Curb Your Enthusiasm, sort of. Yeah, there was a sitcom where being a meter maid goes to somebody's head. Um, yeah, you know,
Yeah,
yeah.
and
The
that's
the
exactly
food
it.
rioting is quite effective.
Yeah. Um, so yeah, so there's that sort of side of things. So you've got that sort of the say the bureaucracy and that sort of thing on, but Ruth is on her quest, and she's the one that takes us through to the future, and it starts to go sort of like 30 days, 40 days, and jump sort of forwards as she becomes more and more pregnant. And you see people leaving the cities and going into sort of like the rural areas and looking for homes. And you see her sort of there's people sort of taking advantage of sort of different trades. There's a one point I wouldn't mind asking your opinion on. I'm curious about how to read it. So there's a scene where they go back into the city, and there's always these images of babies and new things. And I thought this was kind of interesting. There's a billboard, and it's like a baby and stuff. And there's a
Mm-hmm.
guy, and he basically sort of like he somehow trades something with Ruth, and he gives her a bunch of rats,
Oh yeah,
which I'm assuming for food. But I never
yeah.
see what she trades with him, and I was almost taking it as like this is almost like what's the oldest trade in the world kind of thing, where
The sex, right?
yeah, um, but it never shows that, but it's kind of implied in a very British way. In the case of, it's not really implied; it's almost there, but not. Um, but yeah, that thing of like when society is completely broken down and you have sort of like people eating rats and the people sort of trudging through the snow into the countryside and freezing to death, um, and stuff. And
Yeah, I didn't think about, what she had traded there. I was so focused on, okay, the point is we're eating rats now.
mm,
You know, um, I'm sort of, you know, doing my best to follow, all of it. Um, but I think you're right about that. I wanted to ask you about the as they go into the countryside, there's a plane that's telling them return to your homes, and
yes,
presumably this is from a neighboring city, that's basically like don't come here and take our resources,
yeah,
right?
pretty much.
But I think where's the petrol for this plane coming
Yeah.
from? Like, is this a
Well,
efficient use of resources? Like, and it's funny, like, even in the aftermath of an apocalypse, we will continue to kindly warn people of the exact protocol they should follow.
what's funny about that actually, you make a really good point because either just before or slightly after, because this is still while the bureaucratic sort of team are still there, the council team are still there, there is a debate about sharing fuel with another um, council. And the point they go
Mhm.
is, well, no, that's tough. Well, I don't know what they bloody did. They had the same as us. I don't know what they've done with it. That's their problem. And so there is a sort of a suggestion of almost inefficient use of fuel, and you've seen a plane. So, I
Maybe
agree.
that's what it
Yeah,
was.
there
Yeah.
is kind of a suggestion of like other people have been more, excessive or less frugal with their supplies. But you are right. I think it's an interesting scene. Um, we should highlight that Ruth then meets up with a friend of her boyfriend's, and they become sort of like they're trying to support each other for a time. And they find a sheep that has died. And
Mm.
I love his debate with himself, where he's like, "Look, well, it's got thick. I can use the thick wool to keep warm, which is, I can use its skin." And she's like, "But if it's dead, is it? What did it die of?" And he's like, "I don't know, but it can't have been poisoning because of the thick wool."
I know. The rat. Well, I mean, the best interpretation of that is that it's a insane rationalization, right? Because they're
Yes,
so hungry.
exactly.
But
Yeah, and you see them eating like raw
yeah.
mutton and raw sheep flesh. Um, and then it's sort of it's we have gone to sort of savagery. Like this is a complete, they're not even they don't even have the capability to create fire to cook this anymore. They're eating it off the bone. We have gone lesser than our cave-based ancestors to an extent. And that's really kind of like, the low point. I forget now how he dies now, but he is taken out of the picture at some point. I forget how he
Or
becomes a
did they
little.
just cut to sort of 10 years later and he's not around?
No, no, no,
Did,
because you
do we
have
see
her.
him die?
I can't remember if you do because he's very unimportant. Because the next thing that really happens, which is important, is we've obviously seen babies have been important throughout this section. We
Hmm.
talked about her. We know she's pregnant. She's been trying to feed up to um, uh, save her baby. Her dad's already talked about it. She needs extra rations because she's, eating for two. You've seen the woman with the burnt corpse of the baby. Throughout the film, when they're in the city, you see sort of like advertisements for baby products of what would have been in civilized society. So they keep hammering home, and eventually, what they'll say to you is Nigel Hawthorne pops up again and talks about radiation impacting deformity
Hmm.
at a certain part of the pregnancy, and says how
Right.
it can impact things. So you are sort of setting up throughout to be reminded that she's pregnant and something terrible is going to happen. And she eventually sort of finds a farm and breaks into the barn really, and we have a she gives birth, and again it's kind of raw because she's on her own.
Yeah.
And she gives birth and we are shown eventually that it's and this is what I think is really interesting to this final. This almost like this is where it becomes the finale almost. Like this is the third kind of act. She gives birth to a young girl, and so now she's got to care for this baby, and you see her biting through the umbilical cord. Like no word of a lie. Like it shows it in close up. Like and she's eating it because of how starving
Yeah.
she is. And so yeah, like that's where this film goes. Um, and then it starts to jump forward like much more. Then it's sort of like this is what happens at 18 months. So it's at 3 years, and then it takes a large leap forwards. And they're all basically it's crap. Like we haven't been able to stabilize. There's a kind of a government, but we haven't got control of the whole country. And it jumps. I think you're right, sort of 10 to 13 years later. And um, one of the things that but basically, like we see that Ruth, although it's 10 years later, has aged terribly. Like the radiation has caught up with her, and they've been farming or they've stayed on the farm or something. And the daughter is is trying to survive because her mother dies. Ruth dies, and you have this young girl, and then she becomes pregnant. And I'm
Yeah.
assuming it's because of rape, basically, because she has some food.
Well, she has sex with one of the guys who they flee, another firing squad from,
Yes.
Yeah.
Um.
And Ruth has died with cataracts, like,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
yeah, that's a nice little touch.
Yes. So 10 years have passed, but she's aged. Like they make her look really sort of haggard. Like that, it's not. I would say it's not the level of makeup that was in The Day After, but they've really tried to sort of like age her up and show the effects of this thing. But that they show the daughter as being relatively healthy. They're trying
Hmm.
to make this point of there's this and that. Like she hasn't lost her hair. She seems okay, but she becomes pregnant. The end of this film is it's an odd one because again, like let's just so just to remind you, the end of The Day After. And this is the difference. This is what I want to say. The difference
Mm.
between the American and the British in this sense, is you have the doctor. He's ill and he goes back to Kansas City to find his home, and he has that moment of like, "Get out of my house!" with that small group of that small family holding by the hearth. And then as he breaks down, the other man comes over and hugs him, and that's sort
Mm.
of like these two men, sharing this moment. That's the end of The Day After. The end of Threads is this teenage girl giving birth in a medieval looking sort of hospital situation, screaming through the pregnancy or through the birth. And then basically it ends with you never see it, I should highlight, but she's handed the baby and she pulls back the swaddling cloth and she basically screams and it cuts to black.
Hmm.
That's it.
Yeah, and my presumption is the baby's dead, right?
Well, I don't
Or
know.
or terribly deformed
Terribly
or
deformed was
something,
what I was
right?
thinking. Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
Or both. It's just
well, this focus on reproduction is, interesting and different from The
mm,
Day After. Um, I really like this end. I mean, I really like this telescoping into the future.
mm,
It's more speculative, and I think that's part of why The Day After doesn't do it. I think that, The Day After there's that warning at the end where it says, if anything, this is optimistic.
yeah.
That's quite true, right? But I mean, and I think the longer you project out, if you start getting into, Mad Max, you start getting into
Hmm.
The Road, you get into much more speculative kind of stuff. So, but I mean, I almost feel like there's this mini Wim Wenders film at the end of
Yeah.
Threads that is really charming. And, it also reminds me that, somebody who studies history and feels a connection to, European history, America has no understanding of a medieval period. This
Hmm.
discussion of the decline of the British population to a medieval level and of, basically city states, of, all these different areas being semi autonomous. I mean, that is the normal state of the world,
Mm.
right? Let's be crystal
Small
clear.
groups. Yeah.
Yeah. But that's not something that's in the American experience. I mean, obviously, we don't have the same connection to
Yet,
Native
let's be clear.
American.
It's yeah, it's
Yeah.
not.
Hey, look, we are doing our best to make ensure we will learn. Um, but so when we imagine this kind of like medieval, being struck back to a medieval level of technology and living, it's much more, Walking Dead, right? And again, we focus on the Clint Eastwood kind of, heroic individual. Um, but we really don't have a picture of that. We don't have, that's not part of our culture. Um, so I found that stuff fascinating, just seeing, the sense of like these serfs working the land, the sense of
Mm,
just like hopelessness. And I think that the generational thing for me, some of it is about just fertility being a problem, right? Which we'll see in other post-apocalyptic movies as we continue with the season. But it's also just kind of this recognition of how miserable the Middle Ages and, let's be clear, some of the ancient world was.
mm.
And lower life expectancy, life was not always, obviously a lot of American immigrants suffered a lot, but our experience is one of, abundance, the likes of which
Yeah.
the world has never known, that we completely take for granted, no matter how much we can bracket it and know intellectually it's not true. What you mean to tell me, uh, it, yeah, it's hard for us to really go there. So to me, that sense of just a medieval world in which survival might depend on one good season of crops,
Mm.
on one generation of babies, that kind of level of civilization is really what I got from that ending, and that sense of, and I like to think globally. I like to think of how old, there's a national reading of this, but there's also a sort of like humanitarian reading of just kind of how dumb for
Mm.
humanity to do this. I mean, it was dumb that we let the Middle Ages happen in the first place.
Yeah.
But to do it again and to do it willfully because you had to press a damn button, is utter madness.
Mm.
Yeah.
No, I agree. I think you're right. I mean, this, I don't know how, because one of the things that's highlighted in this film, and again, I think it's highlighted in The Day After as well, is the inability to communicate across the country. So there's this whole thing of like, we don't know what's happened in the other parts of the country. Like, we don't know what London's like, or we don't know what Washington's like, and so on and so forth. Like, so it stays local. So that one of the things we take for granted, I mean, we've joked and mentioned this before. Like, I'm based in a sort of a just outside Derby in the UK. You're in Waikiki in Hawaii. Like, that's a massive distance. And we're sat here chatting about a film from 1984. Like, the communication,
Yeah.
the communication capabilities that we have today are fantastic. They're astounding. But, so we're talking globally. So, locally in a sort of national level, it's massively taken for granted that you can talk between Sheffield and London or whatever. But if that bomb drops and you have that, EMP pulse, the EMP blast that takes all that out, and all of a sudden you are not able to talk to, Manchester to Leeds, never mind sort of Sheffield to London, all of a sudden communication becomes a lot more difficult and a lot more drawn out as messages are being carried sort of manually. Um, yeah, like, communities shrink because that's just how you have to. Communication, I think, dictates the size of the community. Um, and in this case, it has to be this small thing, and you can deal with what you've got. So even though this projects 10 years into the future, one of the things it clearly highlights to me is the one thing they've not been able to overcome is communication. 1983, 1984, they have television, they have telegrams, they have telephone, long distance, yes, but it's not what we have today with satellites and the internet and stuff like that. So it's interesting to see, like, what would be that ladder back to civilization, I think one of those big steps is the ability to communicate. That's what allows us to grow the size of communities. So yeah, no, it's interesting that the end of this film really is sort of a local farm, as you say, serfs working the land, trying to survive, unable to communicate across, other than I'm sure there'd be horses and other things surviving. But yeah, no, it is quite an impactful ending, by projecting into the future.
Well, the funny thing is they both ended the same situation,
Mm.
right? I mean, this telescopes into the future, but as you say, like, it's not at all clear that, at the end of the day after, that humanity will survive in a meaningful way.
Yeah.
But the hope is what's emphasized, right? I mean, like, if you assume that what's being depicted is we'll help each other, we'll do our best to survive, we're fighting an uphill battle. The American version says, right, we might all die, but we have each other, and it's noble that we try.
Mm.
The British version says, but we all die.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
don't forget,
Yeah.
don't forget the baby's dead or deformed.
Yeah, that's it.
Um,
Well done for being noble. We're all still dead, and it's
yeah,
painful
right.
and it's horrible. Yeah.
Yeah, the American version just cuts like a Shakespearean play, just
Yeah.
cuts, a few hours early, before the end comes.
Yeah, and I think that's it. I think again, this comes back to this mentality of I think we have this. I think when I see things, like you say, you use like Rick Grimes in The Walking Dead as an example of this, and I think I enjoyed the first whatever how many seasons of that before it sort of fell off, but um, one of the things about that show is this thing of community, or you have like the hilltop and the kingdom and so on and so forth. Like, they have these communities that sort of come together, and you're like, oh wow, that's amazing. That's what's going to happen. The UK version of that is still just like 28 days later, where it's just sort of like Robert Carlyle trapped in a house shooting at people, anyone that comes near. Like that's we're much more cynical in sort of like we're like no, we've seen this how this plays out. Like someone takes that you've got this wonderful community with you know a sort of a Rastafarian looking sort of king and a tiger. Cool, that's amazing. He treats you all wonderfully. We're all living under the governor. It's no surprise that the governor was played by a British actor. Like we're kind of used to it. That's where we're living. We're sort of we would accept Negan before we accept James, Rick Grimes. But yeah, no, I think this is interesting as a pairing. Just we sum up on this as a pairing though to come in such quick succession. How any thoughts on watching them as a pairing? Do they work together for you, or as a moment in time?
Well, I think that, I mean, this feels to me very much like a sort of, lower budget localization with
Mm,
different, with different concerns. Um, yeah, I mean, they certainly dramatize this unique period in history when this really was a seen as a realistic prospect,
mm,
which we normally associate with the 50s, but which really was, true of the 80s as, Reagan accelerated the, verbal attacks on the Soviet Union. And, Thatcher was right there next to him. Um, and it's funny that, both, I mean, these are Anglo countries that were busy doing that. We're
mm.
busy experimenting with proto-fascism, at the very least, and accelerating nuclear concerns. And I think in a very real way, as a pairing, historically, these are um, warnings of going that direction. One of the scenes that we haven't remarked upon that I found very effective was the protests prior to the attack, as
Oh
things are
gosh, yeah.
escalating. and the escalation itself might not be done as effectively as the day after. I agree with that, but that protest is feels so contemporary.
Mm,
As a woman is saying, you cannot win a nuclear war. There's no winner. And she's essentially arguing, if we are attacked, we should not fire back. Uh, you know, Maybe we shouldn't stand with the Americans. Um, and somebody in the audience tries to shout her down and call her communist. And I thought, boy, that feels so contemporary. That same sort of like unthinking, you know, right. Well, you're a socialist, it's still there.
mm,
And that stupidity, I mean, to rush headlong into Armageddon because of ideology. And look, everybody's ideological. I'm ideological. No ideology is more important than the survival of the species,
yeah.
right? I mean, if whether it's climate change or nuclear war, if your ideology will ultimately has a 1% chance of destroying the species, the species got to come first, right?
Mm,
Um, so that felt very contemporary, and as a warning, if this is a warning, obviously I'm still concerned about nuclear Armageddon, but I'm especially concerned about the ways in which our entrenched ideologies keep us doing self-destructive short-run things.
mm. No, I think it's a really good point. I forgot about that scene. You are right. It's a really interesting sort of how people are trying to deal with this, thing, and it does talk about labor unions as well in this country. Like it's mentioned. So yeah, no, it's really interesting. Like, you're right, and you are right that both these films are coming from different they're both Western civilization kind of approaches to this, but they are coming from different, I would say, historical and sort of cultural backgrounds, and it's evident in both. And I kind of like that it does that. Like I think they are a moment in time for both America and Britain, and how they sort of wanted to sort of give a warning of what this is. And I do think that you could watch these in that context and say, well, the 80s were kind of glum in with regards to sort of how they see nuclear survival, but I do think that they are just as relevant and just as sort of it may be that the enemy has changed. In this, obviously, it's Russia. Yeah, it's still Russia for now, but like there are other countries. We've said before about the potential sort of launching of nuclear weapons between India and Pakistan, or you know even if it is between Ukraine and Russia, sort of, it doesn't always have to be us, but the fallout's still going to be there. This is still potentially the sort of there's those kinds of things. So um yeah, one of the things I like about both of these is it does depict hard choices at different levels. You talk about families, we talk about sort of like, you talked about the hospital. Here we sort of see local government. There's a great scene. Actually, you talk about the sort of distribution of food, or the releasing of food. At one point, they have a map with big radius circles on to show sort of the blast
Mm.
radius, and they're talking about distribution of food, and there's actually a whole section like, don't no one in this circle should get food, they're dead already. Like, well, they're alive, no, but they're dead. Like, they're so far gone
Mhm.
with radiation poisoning, let's not waste food on them, we've got to feed the other people. And so to hear those discussions and decisions being made is hard hitting, and it does, it's impactful. So no, I think this is a great film. I think it is budgeted, it's really low budget in places, like it really does. But I also think that gives it a bit of a gritty appeal as well. Do I want to have seen this using a local soap opera cast?
I
It would have definitely put a different spin on it, I think. Um, but yeah,
want to
no,
see EastEnders.
yes, the London version. Oh, that'd been amazing. They'd have still argued. They'd all been down the Queen Vic. Um, no, I think it's good. I think this is fascinating. I think these two films have been fascinating, and because I'll finish on this. Everything else we've watched so far has had that fantasy separation, whether it be Mad Max, or even we talked about on the beach. That's probably much
Mhm.
more real. but it still has that sort of, it's dramatic, it has a dramatization, it has a plot, it still has that sort of, it's fantastical. It's still removed a little bit. Everything we've had has been removed. These two really are like, they're trying to show you slice of life kind of drama before the bomb and stuff. And in doing so, I think they're successful in being, different elements of different nightmares to digest. So yeah.
Well, part of the problem is that the Mad Max stuff, which we love, and Walking Dead too, for all of their grittiness of a lot of these post-apocalyptic movies, kind of depicted as a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Or at least a series of opportunities, right? I mean, in the survivalist subculture, right? There is preparation for hard times and terrible things, but there's also a kind of celebration of the opportunities that will yield, right? In a very American, sort of hopeful, right? Well, maybe I'll be the king of Sheffield, in this way. And both of these, sort of illustrate, at least when it comes to atomic warfare, this is really fundamentally stupid.
Yeah.
And I think a call for thinking globally, thinking as a species, right, by all means have your national pride, have your national concerns, you have a responsibility to be so, but at the same time, the planet and human survival comes first, and these are unthinkable. And in a way far more important as a pair than the fun stuff that we enjoy talking about more.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Anyway, I think we shall end on that note. It's very true, but we aren't done with the apocalypse. We are taking a break from the apocalypse. So if we were to say in the apocalypse, no one can hear you scream. Well, they sure can, but in space, no one can hear you scream. So we are doing a bit of a side quest of our own. In the lead up to Alien Romulus, which will be coming out in August, we are doing. I'm going to say that we'll say the first four, what I consider to be the legit Alien franchise: Alien, Aliens, Alien 3, and Alien Resurrection.
The core movies.
The core movies, yeah, the essential ones, not the shit ones. Although we'll have words about we'll have some words about Resurrection. But yes, we will be talking about those in the lead up to Alien Romulus on the main feed. But that's not to say there aren't things to talk about alien wise for Patreon. We are, of course, going to do a bonus. We're not going to let you down. And so we are going to be talking about Alien. What's it called again?
Was it Insurrection? No.
Insurrection. Something like that. Basically, it's the one of the games that was done, and a movie version was to create using the cutscenes and additional animation.
Isolation.
Isolation, thank you, which is available on YouTube. And so we're going to discuss that as a Patreon bonus. So go check out that on over there.
And it takes place between the original Alien and Aliens, just like Alien Romulus. So I'm really curious, is that still going to be in continuity? Or, are they going to break that? So, I think that's sort of fascinating.
It could be interesting. It could be interesting how they're doing the Alien canon. Because, and the other thing is, I was watching an on-set video on YouTube recently for Alien Romulus, and they were saying they didn't want to use CGI, and so it's the practical sets, and some of these sets were huge and really impressive. Yeah. So I'm kind of excited to see how this all sort of comes together now. Anyway,
and it perfectly continues from Threads, because the secret agenda of the Alien movies is reproduction is horrible.
Yes, basically, that's it. Yeah, don't have kids, people. Is what we're saying. I think that's going to be the output of this season. What the world is a terrible place, and we're all going to die in nuclear fire. So why bother? That was the subheading of Threads. Anyway, yes, thank you so much for your support. We greatly appreciate this, and I hope you've enjoyed the show. Let us know what you think. If you watch Threads, it's available. Just Google it online. I watched it on archive.org. It's also available on Vimeo, and a few other places. It's available on there. So
It's even on YouTube.
it's on YouTube as well. Yes,
Yeah,
there
if
are
you look
different.
around, yeah.
Yeah, so you can find it. It's so you haven't got to pay for it, or get a hard copy. It's available online for free. I'll make sure there's some links available down below. But thank you. Let us know what you thought. Is it as nightmarish for you as it was for us? Did you find it interesting? Have you watched this and the day after? So what are your thoughts, the comparisons? I'll be fascinated to find out. Anyway, for now, Julian, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for showing me this. I
Yeah.
was not aware of this beforehand.
No, I think it's been great to talk about this and sort of the day after. I've been really enjoyed sort of seeing them as a pairing, so it's been good. And we'll be back on the Patreon for Alien Isolation. But obviously, don't forget main feed for the Alien franchise. But for now, thank you very much, and we shall see you again soon.
There's something very important I forgot to tell you.
What?
Don't cross the streams.